I woke with salt water in my mouth and my brother's boot grinding into my ribs. 6 guards were pushing their launch away from a black beach. My hands were pale and bruised. Green hair, dark at the roots and gold at the ends, hung across my eyes. This was not my body. Memories collided. I had died beneath collapsing steel. Now I was Akira Valen, a 19-year-old noble accused of stealing famine grain. I had been sent to an island where prisoners rarely survived a week. My older brother Darian watched from the launch. "Do not worry," he called. "There will be enough land for your grave." The guards laughed and rode away. I had an empty flask, a broken sword, and poisoned wilderness behind me. Then a pale line formed a square around my boots. Territory Lord system activated. Current territory, 1 square meter. Kill a true monster personally. Reward, current territory multiplied by 100. In my first life, I died building homes I could never afford. In my second, I finally owned land, 1 square meter. The island intended to kill me before sunset. The strange clarity of that thought faded as pain dragged Akira back into the injured body. Each breath scraped his ribs. One eye had swollen nearly shut. Dry blood stiffened his collar, and his left leg threatened to fold whenever he put weight on it. Darian's men had beaten the former owner during the voyage, perhaps to ensure Hunger Island received a corpse, even if its monsters proved lazy. The broken memories settled into a clearer order. Their father had died the winter before, leaving Darian as head of House Valen. The younger brother had found 2 inventories for the same relief grain, one prepared for royal auditors, and another showing wagon loads sold through Darian's private quay. If the fraud became public, Darian could lose his title, and Akira stood next in the family line. Darian had placed Akira's seal on the false inventory and sent him away before any public hearing could begin. The system remained before him. Territory effect. Corruption is neutralized within owned land. Existing soil, water, plants, and monster flesh become safe. No resources are created. Expansion rule. New territory must connect to existing territory and grow as one continuous region from a chosen side or broad sector. It cannot form detached enclaves or a narrow corridor built only to reach a distant resource. Core rule. A complete magical core forms only in a dominant territorial monster. Ordinary animals and lesser corrupted creatures do not qualify. Mature core monsters hold separate ranges and drive away or consume weaker rivals within those ranges, which makes them rare. Personal kill rule. Assistance is permitted. The final lethal action must be performed by the territory lord. Akira tested the boundary with 1 foot. Outside the pale line, black seawater soaked his torn shoe and made the skin burn. The pain eased when he stepped back. A stone inside the square shed its greasy crust beneath his thumb, revealing clean gray rock. The system was real. It was also remarkably stingy. His safe territory was smaller than the rented room where he had spent his last winter. He could stand inside it. He could sit if he folded his legs. Lying down meant leaving either his head or his feet in poisoned ground. Hunger Island curved away on both sides. Thorny shrubs with purple-veined leaves covered the slope. Tide pools were cloudy. A dead gull lay near one with foam dried around its beak. The old Akira's memories supplied the rest. House Valen used this place for debtors, criminals, disobedient soldiers, and people whose trials might inconvenience important families. Ships came twice each year. Most prisoners died before the next visit. Water first, shelter second, food third, unless something tried to eat him. Something clicked behind him. A shore crab, the size of a large dog, crawled between 2 boulders. Black plates covered its shell. One claw was broad enough to break Akira's shin, and violet light pulsed beneath the thinner armor around its mouth. A magical core. The crab raised both claws and rushed sideways. Akira jumped from the square as the larger claw snapped where his knee had been. Stone chips struck his cheek. He slashed at a leg joint. The broken blade bounced away and numbed his hand. The creature pivoted to protect its face. Scratches on the shell showed where earlier prisoners had attacked. It knew people were dangerous only from the front. Akira retreated between two rocks. The gap narrowed behind him. In his first life, he had moved wall panels too heavy for one man by using wedges, slopes, and the weight of the material itself. Strength mattered. Angles mattered more when strength was missing. The crab followed. Its shell scraped both rocks. Akira kicked a loose plank from an old boat wreck. It slid beneath the creature's left legs. The crab lurched, and its shell wedged into the gap. Its free claw caught Akira's shirt and dragged him forward. He twisted until the cloth tore, seized a stone, and smashed the trapped limb at the joint. The first blow cracked it. The second made the claw sag. The crab thrashed hard enough to grind one side free. Akira shoved the plank beneath its shell like a lever and forced his weight down. Pain flared through his ribs. The shell lifted a few inches, exposing soft violet tissue. He drove the broken sword into it. The blade stopped halfway. Dark fluid spilled across his hand. The crab struck his shin with a rear leg and opened a bloody line. Akira pulled the sword out, changed the angle, and thrust toward the pulsing light beneath the mouth. The core resisted like hard glass. He pressed until the nicked blade cut his palm through the grip. The violet light shattered. The crab went still. Akira remained bent over the hilt, breathing through his teeth. His bruises still ached, his hands still shook, and the blade had gone exactly where he forced it. The system had supplied a condition rather than strength. Then new text appeared. True monster destroyed. Current area, 1 square meter. New area, 100 square meters. Choose a direction. A rain groove, a shallow stone niche, and most of the wrecked boat lay east of him. Akira faced that way and chose. The pale boundary raced across the beach in a broad, connected shape. Black crust curled away from stone. Purple veins faded from several weeds. The foul film vanished from a rain pool, revealing clear water over pale gravel. The dead smell thinned until salt and wet wood returned. The crab's shell lost its oily sheen. Steam rose from the wound with the scent of clean shellfish. Akira crawled to the pool and drank from cupped hands. He forced himself to take slow mouthfuls. A starving body wanted everything at once, and obeying it could waste the first clean water he had found. His estate now contained 3 dry logs, half a broken boat, a stone niche, rope-like seaweed, a small rain pool, and enough crab meat for several days. "In my first life, I did not own a room," he said. "Now I am a landowner." Rain began tapping against the rocks. Akira looked at the open sky, then at the niche that was too shallow to cover his legs. His first administrative decision was to build a roof. He pried boards from the wreck with the sword, twisted seaweed into cord, and leaned the wood over the niche. The shelter leaked along one side and trembled whenever the wind changed, yet it kept the rain from his face. He cracked the crab shell with stones and cooked small pieces over a fire made from shaved wood, and sparks struck from the sword's spine. The first fire died. The second filled the shelter with smoke. The third caught just before his fingers lost feeling. He ate slowly, cleaned the wound on his shin, and covered the rain pool with a board. The territory made water safe and monster flesh edible. Everything else remained his responsibility. Night closed around the 100 square meters. Outside, the faint boundary, poisoned shrubs moved in the wind. Akira rested with the broken sword across his chest. Near midnight, a howl rolled along the shore. He rose and found 4-footed tracks pressed into the wet black sand at the edge of his land. They led east toward a cleft in the headland where green moss grew, despite the corruption. A drop of clear water clung to one print before the poisoned soil swallowed it. The creature had come from a fresh source. Akira touched the empty flask at his belt and listened to the next howl. His second piece of land would have water. Morning revealed how little safety 100 square meters truly offered. The rain pool held less than 2 buckets. Half had filled with blown sand during the night. Akira covered it with a board, cooked another strip of crab meat, and spent the first light studying every mark along the eastern edge of his territory. The four-footed creature had visited twice. Its newer tracks crossed the older ones and continued toward the same cleft. The moss there was a deeper green than anything else on the shore. Moisture darkened the stone several yards above the tide line. A spring lay inside the rock. The monster had claimed it. Akira did not walk straight into its den. He climbed the southern slope, keeping within sight of the coast, and watched from above. The headland formed a narrow shelf around a cave mouth. At high tide, waves covered most of the shelf. At low tide, a path opened around the outer rock. The reef hound emerged near noon. It was longer than a wolf and built close to the ground. Stone-colored plates covered its spine, shoulders, and skull. Between those plates stretched dark blue hide. Its paws ended in hooked claws designed to grip wet rock. When it lowered its head to drink from a trickle at the cave mouth, Akira saw a green core pulse behind the ribs. The hound raised its muzzle. Its pale eyes found him on the ridge. Akira moved before it growled. He descended toward the beach, intending to draw it away and learn its speed. The hound crossed the shelf in 3 bounds. It did not follow the winding path. Its claws held the near vertical rock, and it ran across the slope as if gravity had chosen not to interfere. Akira barely brought the sword up in time. The hound struck from his left, knocked the blade aside with its plated snout, and raked his shoulder. Heat tore across his skin. He stepped backward, found nothing beneath 1 foot, and fell from the ledge into the sea. Corruption burned his eyes and the cuts on his body. He kicked away from the rock while the hound paced above, unable or unwilling to leap after him. A current dragged him west. Akira let it carry him until he reached the edge of his owned beach, then crawled across the pale boundary. The burning faded slowly. Blood ran from 4 grooves across his left shoulder. He washed the wounds, pressed boiled seaweed cloth against them, and sat under his bad roof while rainwater dripped onto his knee. The hound was faster on rock, stronger at close range, and armored where a frightened man would aim. Direct combat would end with Akira feeding the island before lunchtime. He ate a measured portion of crab meat and began sorting materials. The boat rack held 2 useful lengths of timber. One was a straight spar, a little longer than Akira was tall. The other was a heavier section of the broken mast. He also found several pegs, a bent iron ring, and more rope than he had first noticed. Most of the rope was rotten. The inner strands near the knots remained usable. He combined them with twisted seaweed, tested each length around a stone, and discarded anything that frayed. For 2 days, he studied the tide. At low water, the shelf around the cave was 6 paces wide. A deep crack split it near the outer edge. At high water, the crack vanished beneath the waves, and the route back to the beach narrowed to a single wet lip between cliff and sea. Akira carried both timbers to the headland in 5 exhausting trips. He sharpened the lighter spar with stone and the broken sword, creating a rough spear. The sword fragment became its point after he bound it with cord and drove wooden wedges around the tang. A thin recovery line was tied through a hole near the rear of the shaft and coiled behind a rock where it could pay out without catching his legs. He set the heavier mast section horizontally above the narrow lip, supported by stones and a smaller beam. A rope ran from the support to a hiding place on the upper slope. If he pulled it, the timber would fall across the ledge. It would not kill the hound. It might pin it long enough to make killing possible. The margin was poor. Poor margins were familiar. On the 4th morning, Akira ate the last safe crab meat. His rain pool was nearly dry. The wound on his shoulder had stopped bleeding, but pulled whenever he lifted his arm. He waited for the tide to begin rising, then approached the cave with the spear. The hound appeared before he reached the shelf. It remembered him. Its lips drew back from teeth lined with gray mineral deposits, and it advanced more carefully this time. Akira threw a stone at its face. The stone struck a plate and bounced away. The hound charged. He ran along the shelf, keeping the spear crosswise so the point would not catch the cliff. Claws scraped behind him. He reached the outer crack, jumped, and landed badly on the far side. Pain shot through his left ankle. The hound cleared the gap without slowing. Akira turned and thrust. The spear point skidded along the creature's shoulder armor. Its jaws closed on the shaft and wrenched it aside. He let go before the movement pulled him within reach. The hound tossed the weapon into the sea. That had not been part of the plan. Akira ran toward the narrow lip. Water surged over it, ankle deep. The hound followed, but the rising tide had changed its confidence. It placed each foot carefully, claws seeking cracks. Akira climbed 2 steps up the slope and seized the hidden rope. He pulled. The support beam shifted halfway and stopped. Swollen cord had jammed around the iron ring. The hound struck Akira's legs. He rolled across the slope, losing the rope. Teeth snapped near his hip. He drove his forearm against the plated throat and felt his sleeve tear. The monster's weight pushed him toward the water. Akira reached for anything. His hand closed around a fist-sized stone. He smashed it against the hound's eye. The first blow made the creature recoil. The second opened a thin line between 2 skull plates. He kicked free and lunged for the rope. This time, he wrapped it around his waist, planted both feet against the cliff, and dropped his weight. The swollen knot tore loose. The heavy mast section crashed onto the ledge. One end struck the hound across the back and forced it sideways into the crack. The creature's front half remained above water. Its hindquarters wedged below, where each incoming wave hammered it against stone. Akira did not wait. He scrambled down to retrieve the spear, but it had floated beyond reach. The broken sword point was still tied to its end, bobbing in the channel. The hound twisted under the fallen timber. Stone plates cracked against the cliff. One forepaw came free and carved furrows in the ledge. Akira grabbed the rope attached to the shaft and hauled. The spear slid toward him. A wave lifted it onto the rock. The hound tore one hind leg from the crack. Akira braced the spear beneath his good arm and approached from the side. The creature snapped at the point and knocked it away. He thrust again, aiming behind the front leg, where the green pulse shone through dark hide. The point entered, but the angle was shallow. The hound screamed and surged upward, lifting the fallen timber several inches. Akira's injured shoulder failed. The spear slipped. The hound pulled itself halfway free. He stepped onto the fallen timber and drove his full weight through it. Wood pressed the creature back into the crack. Akira recovered the shaft, shortened his grip, and thrust beneath the ribs. The sword point struck something hard. He pushed until the bindings cut into his palms. The hound's jaws closed once on empty air. Its body loosened beneath the fallen timber, and the next wave washed dark blood from the stone. Akira remained standing only because both hands were locked around the spear. The system formed before him through rain and spray. True monster destroyed. Current area, 100 square meters. New area, 10,000 square meters. 1 hectare. Choose a direction. Akira faced the cave and the slope beyond it. He chose east and inland. The boundary spread from his beach in a broad arc. It crossed the headland, filled the cave, climbed the lower hillside, and reached a cluster of twisted trees. Corruption withdrew along the ground. Black lichen faded from the cave wall. The trickle at its mouth strengthened as foul deposits dissolved from the channel. Clear water ran over Akira's boots. Beyond the cave, yellowed leaves turned green. 3 low trees straightened as if released from a long wait. Small orange fruit hung beneath their branches. The soil in a sheltered hollow changed from gray dust to dark earth threaded with roots. Akira drank from the spring, then washed his shoulder and ankle. The water did not close the wounds, though the clean chill eased them. He cut edible meat from the hound and smoked part of it over a fire. He buried the broken core outside the spring cave after deciding that he did not want it leaking into his drinking water, even if the territory claimed it was harmless. By evening, he had a better shelter inside the cave, a dependable water source, fruit that tasted like a sour pear, and enough cleared ground for future beds. He found a flat plank, scraped it clean, and carved words with the tip of the spear. Akira's territory. Population, 1. Tax rate, 0%. He planted it beside the spring and considered his work. The economy is also at 0, he said. The cave gave no opinion. At dawn, while checking the upper boundary, Akira noticed a thin ribbon of smoke rising beyond the poison trees. It appeared, vanished in the wind, then returned from the same place. Someone had made a controlled fire. There were other people on Hunger Island. Akira did not follow the smoke empty-handed. He packed smoked hound meat, 6 pieces of fruit, and enough cord to mark his return route. The spring water went into a skin made from the clean inner layer of the crab shell. The spear served as a walking staff. His left shoulder remained stiff, and the ankle he had twisted on the ledge swelled by midday. The cleared hectare ended at the first line of trees. Beyond it, the island changed at once. Leaves darkened, flies gathered around patches of pale fungus. Akira wrapped cloth over his mouth and chose high ground wherever possible. The smoke rose from a valley whose lower edge began less than half a mile beyond the upper boundary of Akira's hectare. Reaching it still took most of the day, because a broad marsh occupied the direct lowland route. Its water reflected the sky with an oily violet shine. Broad tracks circled the mud, each wider than Akira's hand. Trees along the edge had been stripped of bark at shoulder height. Several carried deep gouges from tusks. He went around. Near sunset, a stone struck the ground beside his foot. Akira stopped beneath the remains of an old wooden gate. The valley ahead contained perhaps 24 huts, though most had collapsed. Smoke leaked from a hole cut in the roof of the largest building. A thin man with a sling crouched behind a wall. 2 more figures emerged between the ruins, holding sharpened poles. They stared at Akira's hair first. Even under dirt, the green roots and gold ends marked him as someone from House Valen. The old body's memories carried the family fashion. Servants had once called the coloring a blessing of spring. On Hunger Island, it made him look like the person responsible for everyone being there. A broad-shouldered man stepped into the path. He wore pieces of old border armor, tied together with leather strips. Gray touched his beard, though his face was only in its 30s. A short sword rested low in his right hand. "Put down the spear," he said. Akira planted its butt in the dirt instead. "I came because I saw smoke. I have food and clean water." The word clean changed the valley. A woman appeared in the doorway of the large hut. She had dark red hair cut roughly at her jaw, and sleeves rolled above scarred forearms. Her eyes went to the shell container at Akira's side. Behind her, a child coughed with a wet, exhausted sound. The man with the sling moved before anyone could stop him. He rushed from the wall, one hand reaching for the water. Akira pivoted and used the spear shaft to bar his chest. The man grabbed it, frantic enough to ignore the blade. "Joran," the armored man warned. Joran pulled harder. His cheeks were hollow, and sores covered his lips. "He has a whole skin. We have children drinking boiled mud." The armored man struck Joran across the wrist with the flat of his sword. The grip loosened. 2 others dragged him back, though anger remained in every line of his body. Akira could have retreated. Instead, he untied the shell container and handed it to the red-haired woman. "You know how to test it?" She studied him, then poured a few drops onto a strip of gray root. The root usually darkened in poisoned water. It remained gray. She tasted 1 drop, waited, then drank a mouthful. Her shoulders lowered slightly. "It is safe," she said. The settlement made room for him after that. The armored man was Bran Holt, once a captain on the northern border. A governor had ordered his company to burn a village accused of aiding rebels. Bran refused. The governor kept his office. Bran came to Hunger Island. The woman was Mira Sen, formerly an assistant to a physician who treated debtors without charging noble rates. When the physician died, creditors sold his clinic and accused Mira of stealing medicines that patients had already paid for. She kept records with charcoal on pieces of flattened bark and knew exactly how many mouths the valley could feed. 23 people remained. The youngest was 8. The oldest had stopped counting after 60. They ate bitter roots soaked through several changes of boiled water, shellfish gathered during calm tides, and whatever birds fell weak enough to catch. Their bodies endured the corruption better than new arrivals, though none were healthy. Akira explained the useful truth. He had a safe spring near the eastern shore. Land became clean after he killed a true monster. He did not describe the system window or the exact multiplication. A miracle announced too loudly became an invitation to ownership claims. Bran listened with his arms folded. And you want what in exchange? Work. Once there is enough land to work. Rules that keep food from disappearing. Help killing the creature in the marsh. Joran laughed from the back of the room. A noble arrives with a clean cup and thinks he owns us. Akira looked at the roof beam above Joran. It had been repaired with 3 different kinds of rope and still bowed under its own weight. I own 1 hectare. Most of it is rock. If I planned to become a tyrant, I should have chosen a wealthier population. A few people hid smiles. Bran did not. But the suspicion in his eyes changed shape. Mira asked to see the spring. They left at first light with Bran and 2 others. The direct route took them along the marsh edge. Akira showed them the boar tracks and the bark stripped from trees. Bran knelt beside one print. Marshbeck, he said. It killed 11 people the first year I was here. We stopped crossing the valley after dark. The creature announced itself with a grunt from the reeds. A huge boar stepped onto a mud bank 50 yards away. Plates of dried black clay covered its shoulders and spine. Its tusks curved upward past its eyes. A red core glowed deep inside its chest, visible whenever it inhaled. It watched the 4 people for several seconds, then scraped 1 hoof through the mud. Bran moved everyone uphill before it chose to charge. At the spring, Mira repeated every test she knew. She examined the fruit, the hound meat, the soil, even the moss inside the cave. After drinking 2 cups of water, she sat beside the carved sign. No taxes, she read. Bold policy. It has attracted 1 visitor in 4 days. Your population growth is impressive. She remained serious enough that Akira needed a moment to realize she was mocking him. The hectare could support 23 people briefly, provided they cut more shelter into the cave and lived close together. It could not produce enough food before the stored monster meat ran out. Worse, the marshback controlled the route. Moving sick people through its feeding ground would invite an attack. Akira needed the next expansion, and the next expansion required the boar. Preparation took 19 days. The exiles moved in small guarded groups to gather clean water while leaving most of their supplies in the valley. Akira carried fruit saplings and edible seeds from his land. Mira organized rations. Bran trained 6 people to hold spears in a line rather than wave them like frightened sticks. Akira studied the marshback. It followed 3 regular paths. At dusk, it drank from the marsh. Near midnight, it crossed the ruined northern wall to dig beneath a patch of corrupted nut trees. Before dawn, it rubbed its armor against 2 stone pillars beside a narrow ravine. The boar could smash a fence. Bran had seen it overturn a wagon. A single pit would fail if the creature jumped or broke the edge. Akira planned for several failures in a row. Workers dug a shallow trench across the midnight path and covered it with reeds. It would not trap the boar. It would force an awkward landing. Beyond it, they drove angled stakes into the ground, leaving a gap that appeared wide enough for the animal. The gap led between 2 stone walls, where turning would be difficult. Farther inside, a deeper pit waited beneath woven mats. Ropes ran from buried anchors to loops positioned at leg height. They burned foul roots and boar dung in small clay pots, so their scent would blend with the marsh. Every tool had to be carried from Akira's hectare or scavenged from ruins. The work left hands split and shoulders swollen. One night, rain collapsed half the deep pit. They dug it again. Bran questioned the final position. If it clears the second trench, it reaches the valley. Then we close the old gate behind it and use the stone passage. That passage ends beside the food store. Akira glanced toward the ruined building. Then, everyone will have a strong reason to hold the ropes. On the 20th night, they placed fermented roots beneath the corrupted nut trees and waited. The marshback arrived after moonrise. It smelled the bait, circled once, and charged the moment Bran's archers released their first arrows. The shafts struck the clay plates and broke. That was expected. Their purpose was to make the animal choose the prepared route. It hit the shallow trench at full speed. The covering collapsed. One front hoof dropped, but the boar tore free in the same stride and smashed through the first line of stakes. Its shoulder clipped an angled post, turning its body toward the gap. Akira stood beyond it with a torch. The boar saw him and accelerated. He waited until the red glow inside its chest filled his view, then threw the torch into a pile of dry reeds and jumped behind the wall. Flame rose along one side. The animal swerved from the heat and entered the passage exactly where the ropes had been placed. 2 loops caught its front legs. Exiles hauled from behind stone blocks. The boar stumbled, recovered, and dragged 3 people off their feet. 1 anchor ripped from the wet ground. The deep pit collapsed under its weight. Its left side dropped, but the armored chest struck the far edge instead of falling. The marshback heaved upward. A tusk tore through the woven cover and flung dirt across the passage. Bran rushed in with a spear, aiming behind the foreleg. Its tusk caught him below the ribs and threw him against the wall. The formation broke. Akira climbed onto the stone edge and drove his spear downward. The point entered a gap near the neck, yet the boar's plates closed around the shaft as it moved. It ripped the weapon from his hands and surged out of the ruined pit. The second anchor snapped. People ran toward the valley. Mira and 2 others dragged Bran through the old gate. Akira followed, then turned when he heard the marshback strike the passage wall. Its right foreleg was bleeding, but rage had replaced its caution. The planned trap had slowed it. It had not stopped it. Akira slammed the gate after himself. The boar hit the timber frame. Rotten wood exploded inward. It entered the narrow lane between 2 ruined storehouses, exactly where Bran had feared it would. There was no space for the creature to turn its armored shoulders. That was the remaining advantage. "Ropes on the rear legs," Akira shouted. The exiles had scattered, but months of surviving together mattered. Joran was the first to move. He threw a loop from a doorway and caught one hind leg. 2 others joined him. The boar kicked, smashing a wall panel, yet the rope held long enough for a second loop. Akira seized a short hunting spear from the ground. Bran, pale and unable to stand straight, pointed toward the creature's neck. "Your first strike opened the plate," he said. The marshback lunged. Its tusks scraped both walls. Akira climbed the outer stairs of the food store, crossed the roof, and jumped onto a stone ledge above the lane. From there, he could see the broken plate behind the boar's head, and the shaft of his first spear lodged beneath it. He stepped onto the shaft. The boar roared and reared. The movement lifted Akira, merely throwing him into the lane. He caught the roof edge with one hand. Below, Joran and the others wrapped their rope around a foundation stone. The boar could move forward only a foot. Akira pulled himself back onto the ledge. He reversed the short spear and held it with both hands over the damaged plate. The creature slammed its shoulder against the wall. Cracks ran through the masonry under Akira's boots. He drove the spear down. The point passed between the plates and entered the red core. Resistance shuddered through the shaft. The core fractured, but the boar remained upright. Akira pushed until the wood bowed and his injured shoulder felt ready to tear open again. The red light went dark. The marshback took one final step. Its legs folded, and its armored head struck the ground hard enough to shake dust from both roofs. No one cheered at once. 2 people had rope burns deep enough to expose flesh. Part of the food store had collapsed, and the dead monster blocked the lane. Then, green light spread across Akira's vision. True monster destroyed. Current area, 10,000 square meters. New area, 1 square kilometer. Choose a direction. Akira climbed down beside Bran and pictured the ground between the spring and the valley. The old hectare sat on the coast behind them. From its inland edge, a broad strip of low ground ran through the marsh before opening around the camp, the wooded slope, and the stream. The shape would remain compact. It would also connect every place the exiles needed. From the spring through the valley, he said. The boundary expanded from the existing hectare. Far to the east, a pale front left the fruit trees and moved inland across the full width of the low ground. It cleaned the marsh, instead of threading through it as a narrow path. The advancing line reached the ruined gate, passed through the lane, and then opened across the valley floor. Corruption peeled away from roof beams, stones, and soil. Violet-black water became an ordinary brown marsh reflecting the moon. Grass unfolded along its edges. The poison nut trees shivered as dark growth fell from their bark. The change continued through the old camp, over a low wooded ridge and along a clear stream that had been hidden beneath mats of fungus. Within minutes, one continuous square kilometer connected the spring, the marsh crossing, and the valley as living land. Children walked barefoot through green grass and kept looking down as if expecting it to stain their feet. Mira washed Bran's wound with stream water, stitched it, and informed him that surviving did not excuse him from bed rest. Joran stood beside the dead boar, still holding the rope that had burned his hands. Akira offered the valley the same terms he had described before. Every able person worked. Those injured or ill received food while recovering. Slavery was forbidden. Essential stores belonged to the settlement. Theft from those stores meant exile beyond the clean boundary. Bran would control patrols and defense. Mira would control medicine and rations. Akira would make final decisions when the safety of the territory was at risk. Joran asked who owned the land. "I do," Akira said. "You can leave whenever you choose. While you stay, your work earns you a home, food, and a voice in how the settlement lives. I will not sell you, draft your children into debt, or charge you for the water." The offer preserved Akira's final authority over danger, instead of promising equality in every matter. Its clarity mattered to people who had spent years under rules designed to hide chains. They accepted. Only one roof in the old camp remained completely sound. By noon, 3 families had argued over it. Akira listened, inspected the building, and ordered everyone to move the seed sacks and remaining grain inside. Mira watched the disappointed families leave. "Congratulations. You have disappointed the entire population of your state on its first day." The grain complained less. That evening, 24 people ate roasted marshback meat beside the clean stream. Bran lay on a pallet near the fire, giving unwanted instructions to anyone who passed. For the first time in years, the exiles ate until they chose to stop. A vast shadow crossed the valley. Wind flattened the fire. People looked up. A wyvern circled above the central mountain, its wings wide enough to darken 3 houses at once. Stone-colored scales covered its body. It carried a goat-sized animal in its claws and dropped it onto a high ledge before landing. Bran's face tightened. Beyond that mountain lay the island's iron vein and its only deep harbor. No prisoner had reached either in years. Akira watched the creature fold its wings over the peak. 1 square kilometer had given the exiles a settlement. The next victory could give them the island. 4 months changed the valley more thoroughly than any speech could have done. The first houses were ugly, low structures of timber and packed earth. Their roofs leaked less than Akira's first shelter, which he considered progress. The exiles repaired the old stream channel and dug irrigation ditches into the southern field. Grain from the protected store sprouted in dark soil. Beans climbed frames made from stripped branches. Fruit saplings from the spring took root along the path. Bran's patrol also found a small feral goat herd on the cleaned wooded ridge. After 2 weeks of patient traps and several less patient arguments, the settlement had 6 animals inside a rough pasture. Work revealed skills that prison records had ignored. Old Toma, convicted after a tax collector seized his workshop, could judge a tree by striking the trunk with his knuckles. Nessa had worked fishing boats since childhood and built 2 narrow craft from the wreckage scattered along the coast. Joran, once fed properly, proved quick with numbers and quicker at discovering where tools had been left. Bran turned a dozen survivors into a watch. Their spears remained mismatched, but they learned to move in pairs, report tracks, and avoid chasing corrupted animals beyond the boundary. Mira created a ledger of grain, dried meat, medicines, tools, births, injuries, and arguments, serious enough to cost work hours. Akira attempted to do all of it. He cut trees before breakfast, trained with Bran after carrying water, repaired boats in the afternoon, inspected the fields at dusk, and checked every storehouse before sleeping. When someone suggested a wall, he helped set the first posts. When the smithy needed a stone base, he hauled rock. When Nessa reported a damaged net, he sat beside her until midnight, twisting cord. His body grew stronger. The hollows beneath his cheekbones filled. Work hardened his hands and shoulders without turning him into a swordsman from a heroic ballad. The reef-hound scar remained white across his left shoulder. His bright blue eyes looked steadier, though increasingly surrounded by shadows from lost sleep. The third warning came after Akira collapsed while carrying a grain sack. He woke on a pallet with a wet cloth over his forehead. Mira sat nearby, adding figures to her ledger. How long was I unconscious? Long enough for the settlement to survive without your supervision. This has upset several of your theories. Akira tried to sit. His muscles answered with a wave of weakness. Mira pushed him down, using 2 fingers against his chest. She explained that a leader who personally carried every sack did not become indispensable. He became a tired porter who delayed everyone waiting for his approval. Bran could command the watch. Toma could direct construction. Experienced farmers could manage planting. Mira could count food without Akira opening every barrel to confirm that grain remained inside. Akira disliked the argument because it was correct. Over the following week, he transferred responsibilities. He still worked, hunted ordinary game inside the clean boundary, and trained with a spear, but stopped appearing in every doorway with another question. Decisions began moving while he was elsewhere. A roof was completed without him measuring it. Patrols changed routes after Bran found fresh tracks. Mira reduced rations for 3 days when mold appeared in a storehouse, and no one starved from her independence. The valley became stronger the moment Akira allowed it to function without his hands on every rope. At the end of the 4th month, Nessa saw a sail, a prison ship anchored off the eastern shore under the crest of House Velen. The crew lowered 2 launches carrying 40 prisoners, 8 guards, and Overseer Pell, the same narrow-faced official who had supervised beatings in the ship's hold. Pell stepped onto the beach, holding a scented cloth over his nose. He expected bones. Instead, Bran and 6 armed watchmen met him beside a clean landing path. Beyond them stood carts, stacked lumber, and a line of green fields visible through the trees. Pell lowered the cloth. "What is this?" Akira approached, in a plain brown coat. His green and gold hair had grown long enough to tie behind his neck. Pell recognized him and lost color around the mouth. The new prisoners looked between them. Most were thin, chained in pairs, and too exhausted to understand why grass grew on an island famous for poison. He declared that every crop, tool, and structure on Hunger Island belonged to House Velen. The crew would load the harvest before leaving. He also demanded that Akira surrender the source of the purification, which Pell called stolen family property, despite having learned of it less than a minute earlier. Akira let him finish. "Release the prisoners, take your chains and leave." Pell signaled his guards. Bran's watch moved from the trees. More settlers appeared along the path, with bows, work axes, and spears. None looked impressive alone. Together, they made 8 guards reconsider the distance to their boats. Pell's hand remained raised. "Lord Darien will hear of this. That is the first useful task you have volunteered for." The overseer left the prisoners, the chains, and 2 crates of spoiled ship biscuit. Before boarding, he promised to return with soldiers who understood obedience. Akira watched the launches pull away. The prison ship remained beyond the eastern reef, while its crew repaired a damaged launch and waited for a north wind. Nessa estimated that it would stay at anchor for 2 nights. Darien had believed his younger brother dead. That protection had ended. 2 of the knee prisoners had worked the Velen docks. They reported that most of the house's war galleys had been requisitioned for a royal campaign in the south and would not return before winter. Darien could not place an army on Hunger Island immediately. He could send agents, letters, and money long before then. The 40 new arrivals more than doubled the settlement in one afternoon. Several were farmers whose villages could not meet wartime levies. One was a blacksmith named Elric, exiled after forging spearheads for rebels who had paid in advance. 2 had worked quarries. A family of 4 had been condemned together because their father struck a tax officer. The new people needed beds, food, tools, and reasons to trust rules written by the son of the house that had sent them there. Mira placed them on temporary rations and paired each with older settlers. Bran collected weapons at first, then returned work knives once tempers settled. Akira spent 3 nights answering practical questions rather than demanding loyalty. The hardest question concerned food. The old settlers had spent months clearing fields and smoking meat. The newcomers had arrived with empty hands and empty stomachs. Giving everyone equal portions immediately felt fair, yet it would leave the people doing the heaviest labor unable to finish the next harvest. Feeding only workers would punish children, the injured, and the older prisoners who knew how to repair tools but could not swing an axe all day. Mira solved the arithmetic and made Akira announce it. Every person received a survival ration. Additional portions went to work crews according to the strain of their tasks. Children and patients ate from the common store. Anyone who wanted private food could grow, catch, or trade for it after completing assigned work. The settlement kept seed grains separate, even when someone complained that grain in a locked room helped nobody. The policy survived its first test on the second night. Joran heard movement inside the seed house and found 2 new prisoners filling a blanket with barley. One was a dock laborer named Sen. The other was his younger sister, whose husband had died during the voyage. They carried no weapons and made no attempt to fight when Bran's patrol surrounded them. A crowd gathered before dawn. Several old exiles demanded that Akira enforce the rule he had created and send both thieves beyond the clean boundary. Sen admitted taking the grain, then explained that a sailor from the ship still anchored beyond the reef had offered space in a returning launch in exchange for food. He did not trust Akira's settlement. Every camp he had known eventually changed rations into chains. Akira understood the fear. He also understood that the stolen barley was part of the next planting. If every frightened person protected only one family, the valley would be hungry together by winter. He did not pretend the theft was harmless. Sen and his sister returned the grain, lost access to the storehouses, and spent the next month on the irrigation crew under supervision. If either stole from the common stores again, exile would follow. Akira made the decision publicly and asked Mira to record both the punishment and the reason for stopping short of the boundary. Bran questioned him afterward. "You changed your own law." "I applied it to people who had heard it for less than a day," Akira said. "Next time, they will know the price." The distinction spread through the settlement. Rules could be strict without becoming traps. By the end of the month, Sen had redesigned the dock ramp so a loaded cart could reach Nessa's boats at low tide. His sister joined Mira's ration team and became the person least willing to overlook a missing scoop of grain. Akira learned something less comfortable. A safe field did not automatically create a community. People watched how power behaved when excuses were available. Every decision became part of the territory, as surely as a wall or road. The territory could feed them through summer. Winter would be harder. The wyvern made that problem immediate. It descended at dusk while shepherds were bringing the settlement's few goats inside the palisade. The first sign was a gust strong enough to tear thatch from a roof. The creature struck the pasture, seized 2 goats, and beat its wings to rise. Bran's archers fired. Their arrows glanced from stone scales. The wyvern swept over the storehouses. Its tail hit a watch platform and sent the guard tumbling into a hay cart. One wing clipped a torch bracket. Burning oil spilled across the roof of the grain building. Fire ran through dry thatch. Akira organized a bucket line from the stream, while Mira and Joran dragged sacks through the rear door. Smoke filled the lane. Sparks reached the neighboring workshop. Toma climbed onto the roof with a wet hide and beat at the flames until part of the beam collapsed beneath him. They saved the workshop and half the grain. The rest burned before the rain began. The wyvern circled once above the valley, carrying its prey toward the mountain. By midnight, the settlement smelled of wet ash. Mira's ledger showed that winter reserves had fallen below survival needs for nearly 70 people. More fields could solve the shortage, but the best plain lay beyond the current boundary. Iron for proper tools and weapons lay under the central mountain. A deep harbor on the western coast could bring trade. All of it belonged to the Wyvern's range. Akira climbed the watchtower with Bran. Firelight moved over the damaged roofs below. At the mountain peak, a dark shape settled against the stars. Bran said the creature had ruled the island longer than any prisoner remembered. Its armor turned arrows. Its wings carried it beyond spear reach. Climbing to its nest would expose people on open rock. Akira studied the ridges, the wind, and the narrow plateau where the Wyvern often fed. "We have 7 days," he said. "After that, either we own the island, or the Wyvern owns everything we built." The settlement spent 7 days building one weapon. Toma chose 2 straight trees from the eastern wood and shaped them into throwing arms. Elric heated every usable strip of metal in a charcoal furnace, including hinges taken from abandoned cells. The old chains recovered from the prison camp were cleaned, tested, and linked into a restraint net reinforced with braided marshback hide. They built the ballista on a stone shelf below the Wyvern's feeding plateau. The shelf overlooked a gorge where the mountain wind rose in steady currents during the afternoon. The weapon's frame was anchored between 3 buried blocks. Its bolt was a young tree tipped with Elric's best iron point. Akira inspected the ground, rather than the weapon. One shot could miss. A trap could break. A winged monster could approach from any direction, unless the terrain persuaded it otherwise. They placed the carcass of a corrupted mountain animal on the narrow plateau. The scent would carry toward the nest. Beneath loose gravel, workers buried the restraint net. 4 ropes ran through stone rings to counterweights balanced behind the ridge. When the Wyvern landed and the central peg was released, the weights would fall into the gorge, pulling the net upward around its wings. Bran positioned archers behind low walls on both sides. Their arrows could not pierce the scales, but they could turn the creature's head and protect the teams working the ropes. Mira organized runners, bandages, water, and stretchers below the shelf. She also made Akira promise that if the first plan failed, he would retreat instead of trying to wrestle the Wyvern because he disliked wasting lumber. Akira promised to use better judgment. Mira wrote down his exact words, which made him suspect the document would be used against him. A second throwing frame waited on a lower terrace. It was smaller and unfinished, assembled from the first ballista's rejected timber. Its arms could bend. Its trigger worked. Its cord had not yet been fully drawn because the winding crew lacked time. A stripped test shaft and 1 spare iron head lay beside it. Akira treated the frame as a repair source. Toma called it insurance. On the 7th afternoon, clouds moved over the mountain. The Wyvern left its nest when the bait smoke reached the upper ridge. It circled twice. Its stone scales blended with the cliff until the gold-gray eyes turned toward the plateau. Then it folded its wings and dropped. The impact shook gravel from the shelf. Akira crouched beside the ballista lever. He wore a leather guard on his injured shoulder and carried a short spear. Bran waited behind the left wall with 12 archers. Rope teams held their lines below the ridge. Its hind claws settled inside the buried net. Akira raised one hand. The central peg came free. 4 counterweights plunged into the gorge. The net burst through the gravel, climbed around the Wyvern's legs, and snapped across one wing. The creature screamed. Its right wing opened, but the left tangled against its body. It jumped, rose several feet, and crashed onto the plateau. Bran's archers fired at the face. The Wyvern turned toward them, exposing the lighter scales along its chest. Akira pulled the trigger. At that instant, a hard crosswind struck the shelf. The heavy bolt left the rail with a roar. It crossed the plateau, scraped the Wyvern's chest, and shattered against the far wall. Stone scales broke away, yet the core remained hidden behind bone and muscle. The Wyvern ripped one leg from the net. Its tail swept across the plateau. 2 archers dropped behind the wall. The tails struck the ballista frame from the side. 1 throwing arm split. The entire weapon tore loose from an anchor and twisted toward the gorge. Akira jumped clear. The frame clipped his hip and threw him onto the lower edge of the shelf. He slid across gravel, caught a length of chain, and stopped with both legs hanging above open air. The wyvern bit through a rope. One counterweight fell away. Its trapped wing opened halfway. Bran ordered the right team to pull. 6 people leaned into the remaining line. The net tightened around the wyvern's hindquarters, forcing it to turn in a narrow circle. It beat its free wing. The gust knocked 2 archers from their feet and lifted the broken ballista, enough to drag Akira farther over the edge. The chain burned through his palms. Below him, the gorge fell into mist. Akira wrapped one loop around his forearm and climbed. Each pull scraped the reef-hound scar against stone. By the time he reached the shelf, the wyvern had torn another opening in the net. It saw him. The creature lunged. Akira rolled behind the broken ballista. Jaws closed around the throwing rail and crushed seasoned wood. He drove his short spear into the soft corner of its mouth. The point entered only inches, but the wyvern recoiled, dragging the ruined weapon with it. Akira ran toward the lower terrace. The creature followed on 3 limbs, one wing trailing in the net. It could not fly properly, though each beat carried it in a long, violent hop. Akira crossed a narrow path between terraces. Behind him, claws struck stone close enough to shower his back with fragments. The unfinished second ballista stood 20 paces ahead. Toma and 4 workers were cranking its winding bar. The cord had reached only half tension. "More!" Akira shouted. Toma looked at the approaching wyvern and continued turning. The other workers did the same. The mechanism groaned. Bran's arrows struck the creature's right eye ridge. It turned its head toward the plateau, and Akira used the moment to reach the lower frame. The second weapon had no finished bolt. Its ammunition rack held only the stripped test shaft and the spare iron head Elric had left there. Akira seized both. Elric arrived with a hammer and leather gloves, having abandoned the shield wall below. Together, they drove the head onto the timber, while Toma's crew forced another turn from the winding bar. The wyvern tore free of the last net rope. It opened both wings. The damaged left wing bent at an unnatural angle, yet the creature still caught the wind. It rose above the terrace and drew its legs beneath its body. The ballista was pointed too low. Akira and Elric threw their weight against the rear support. Toma released one ground pin. The frame tilted upward as the wyvern came down. The trigger rope lay on the far side. Akira climbed across the frame, hooked one foot beneath the rail, and reached. The wyvern's shadow swallowed the terrace. Its jaws opened wide enough to take his upper body. Mira's runners pulled the unfinished winding rope from below. The frame shifted 3 inches. The timber point aligned with the missing scales on the creature's chest. Akira caught the trigger. He pulled. The half-drawn weapon fired at near point-blank range. The timber bolt struck beneath the wyvern's breastbone. The bent iron head broke through scales already damaged by the first shot. Momentum drove the shaft deep into the chest, but the creature's descent did not stop. Its body hit the ballista and shattered the front supports. Akira was thrown sideways. The wyvern landed across the terrace, one claw trapping his cloak. The blue-white light of its core pulsed around the embedded shaft. Still alive, the creature lifted its head. Blood ran from its mouth. One wing swept toward the workers, who scattered among the rocks. Akira, cut free of the cloak, crawled along the fallen frame, and reached the back of the bolt. The shaft had lodged against the core without breaking it. The wyvern rolled, trying to dislodge him. Akira pressed his feet against the ballista's broken base and shoved. Nothing moved. Bran reached the terrace with 2 soldiers and looped a chain around the wyvern's neck. They hauled its head sideways. Elric drove a wedge under the bolt. Toma brought the ballista's winding bar and used it as a lever. The core's light flickered. Akira shifted his grip and pushed again, every muscle in his back tightening against the resistance. The bolt punched through the core. Blue-white light flashed across the terrace. The wyvern's wings struck once, scattering tools, then settled against the rock. Akira stayed beside the bolt until the system appeared. True monster destroyed. Current area, 1 square kilometer. New area, 100 square kilometers. Choose a direction. From the mountain, Akira could see the island's shape through breaks in the corruption fog. It stretched roughly 12 kilometers from north to south and 8 at its widest point, with coves cut into both coasts. The known valley lay east. A river channel descended west toward the deep harbor Bran had described. Dark ridges marked the iron vein and quarry. Akira chose west through the mountain, broad enough to take the whole island. The territory moved. A pale line poured over the ridge and down every connected slope. The black forest below shuddered. Corruption lifted from the canopy in sheets of dark dust that dissolved above the leaves. Gray streams cleared from their sources, carrying clean water through ravines that had been dead for generations. The change reached the eastern valley first. People there saw sunlight strike fields through a sky free of violet haze. Then the boundary crossed the central range. The mountain river brightened like a silver road. Moss withdrew from exposed stone, revealing bands of red-brown iron. The old quarry walls emerged from vines. Westward, the fog split over a natural harbor surrounded by cliffs. Broken docks appeared beneath it. A road of fitted stone ran from the harbor toward the mountain, buried in places, but still visible. On the northern point, a tall lighthouse stood, with half its roof missing. The clean line reached the shore and continued into shallow water until the full 100 square kilometers had been claimed. Around almost 90 square kilometers of land, the nearest coves and reefs became clear. For the first time in living memory, Hunger Island was green. People climbed the valley ridge and stared. Some laughed. Others sat in the grass. Bran removed his helmet and held it under one arm. Mira stood beside Akira, with her ledger pressed against her chest, unable to count anything for several minutes. The wyvern had cost them 6 injured people, 2 ruined ballistas, most of the old chains, and enough timber to build 3 houses. It also gave them meat, hide, bone, and access to everything required for a future larger than survival. Akira kept 1 plate from the shoulder and later wore it over simple leather armor. It was not magical. Elric drilled it, shaped the edge, and complained for 2 days about how difficult it was to work. Exploration parties spent the next month mapping the island. Bran's hunters logged every large track they found, and Elric opened the crystal nodules taken from several corrupted predators. None contained a complete core. The crab, reefhound, marshback, and wyvern had been the island's dominant range holders. With all 4 cores broken, no mature replacement had formed, and the remaining predators carried only incomplete crystal nodules. There would be no line of convenient lesser monsters waiting to multiply the territory again. At sea, Nessa's crews reported one exception. Beyond the northern fog, something longer than a merchant hull sometimes moved beneath the fishing grounds. It never approached the cleaned coast, and no one could yet prove what it was. At the northern cove, Nessa found a metal buoy half buried in sand. It carried the image of 3 crowns above stylized waves. The metal was heavier than local iron and barely corroded. Inside the ruined lighthouse, Bran discovered an old sea chart sealed in a copper tube. North of the island, the map showed a wide band marked with storm symbols. Beyond it, only the lower edge of an unknown continent had been drawn. The same 3-crown emblem appeared near the margin. No one recognized it. For the moment, the mystery had to wait. Fields needed plowing. The harbor needed docks. Darien now knew Akira lived. The first month after the wyvern's death was spent moving a settlement rather than pretending a city already existed. The valley remained the island's main farm and seed reserve. At the western harbor, 64 people faced broken piers, a roofless customs house, and a stone road buried beneath roots. Toma divided the workforce into road, dock, quarry, and housing crews. Mira refused to move the grain stores until 2 dry warehouses had roofs. Bran placed the watch in the lighthouse because its cracked upper room still saw both coasts. Akira wanted every useful task started at once. Mira placed a list in front of him, showing that the settlement possessed 41 sound axes, 14 shovels, 3 carts, and enough stored food for 11 weeks at current rations. They started with the road and 1 pier. The first iron did not make anyone rich. Elric built 2 clay bloomeries beside the mountain stream, filled them with charcoal and crushed ore, and produced a black lump full of slag that broke under his hammer. The second firing failed more expensively. On the third, he drew out a bar of rough iron long enough to make 6 chisel heads. He carried it through the harbor with both hands. Half the settlement followed as if he had forged a crown. The new tools accelerated everything that came after. Quarry workers cut square blocks for foundations. Toma repaired the inland road instead of dragging timber through mud. Nessa used iron nails and straps to rebuild 2 fishing boats. None of it appeared through the system. Every hinge represented ore dug from the mountain, charcoal burned from the forest, and hands that had learned by ruining something first. 6 weeks after the expansion, a weathered brig appeared beyond the western headland. Its captain, Malin Voss, of Port Rel, remained outside the clear water until Nessa guided her between the reefs. Malin had heard 3 different stories about Hunger Island. In one, everyone had died. In another, Akira commanded ghosts. The third claimed he had found a mountain made of silver. She looked at the muddy pier and decided the third story was unlikely. Before opening her cargo book, Malin asked what name she should write for the port. Joran proposed Akira's Taxless Kingdom. Mira rejected it before Akira could decide whether he was being insulted. Bran suggested that the old island name should die with the corruption. Akira looked from the harbor to the first row of houses former prisoners were raising with their own hands. Freehaven, he said. The name entered Malin's ledger and stayed. Her hold carried rye, barley, salt, canvas, lamp oil, medicines, saw blades, and 2 small draft mules. Freehaven had iron in the mountain, but not enough finished tools to exploit it. And the wyvern fire had left their winter stores thin. Malin wanted a trial cargo of bloom iron, cut stone, dried fish, and the hard resin collected from the western forest. Mira negotiated inside the roofless customs house, while rain dripped into 3 bowls on the table. Malin offered grain at a famine price, because the island had no other supplier. Mira opened her ledger and calmly listed the captain's damaged rigging and the extra 4 days required to sail around Darien's toll ports. She also listed the value of a harbor where no official demanded a separate fee for anchor, rope, inspection, prayer, and permission to complain about the other fees. They settled on 30 tons of mixed grain, salt, canvas, seed, and the mules. In exchange, Freehaven would make 3 scheduled deliveries of bloom iron and worked stone over the next 4 months. Malin received a modest first-season discount, not exclusive rights. If Freehaven missed a delivery, the unpaid balance converted to ordinary debt, recorded by both sides. No resident could be seized for it. Before leaving, Malin asked the price of docking. Akira considered the brig and named 1 copper coin. Mira took him behind a stack of stone before the captain could pay. She explained that tying a boat to another man's fence cost more in most ports. The final schedule charged by hull length and days at the quay. Small fishing craft paid almost nothing. Merchant ships paid enough to maintain markers, pilots, and dock crews. Warships paid more because Bran insisted that suspicion required labor. Freehaven's economy began with ledgers before it began with coins. Workers already received food, clothing, and labor credits from the common stores. The first foreign copper and silver entered circulation through Malin's crew, then returned to the treasury when residents bought imported salt, needles, or cloth. Mira established 3 ways to fund common work. 1/5 of the output from the community mine and quarry belonged to the settlement. Harbor and pilot fees maintained the port. Households receiving a plot owed a fixed number of public workdays during their first year, recorded in advance, so no official could invent another obligation later. After charcoal, tools, transport, and the public share were accounted for, the remaining value of the mine output paid the crews who produced it. At first, they were paid in food shares and ledger credit redeemable for tools, private goods, or a future workshop plot. As trade increased, part of the wage came in coin. Families could keep and sell produce grown beyond their assigned common work. Fishers turned over a fixed portion of each catch to the public store and traded the rest. The rules were simple enough to fit on one board near the market. Akira disliked the phrase public revenue until Mira asked whether he wanted the harbor chain made from good intentions. He approved the board. The first large wave of settlers arrived during the third month. Malin returned with 117 people packed between grain sacks. Some were relatives of prisoners who had received letters through sympathetic crews. Others were tenant farmers leaving estates after a second emergency levy. 4 carpenters, 2 potters, a cooper, and a midwife had come because Port Rel's guilds charged more for entry than they could save in 5 years. The harbor did not have houses for them. Tents filled the high ground above the western road. Spring rain turned the lower camp into brown water and carried waste toward the stream. 3 children developed fever before Mira found a drainage ditch blocked by construction debris. She closed the nearest well, moved the latrines downhill, and assigned every able newcomer 2 days on drains before they could choose another crew. No one died, but the illness-consumed medicine Freehaven could not yet replace and stopped a third of the carpenters for a week. The mistake changed immigration policy. Freehaven did not close the harbor. It required each arriving ship to carry either 3 months of food for its passengers or a cargo payment to the common granary. Newcomers received temporary shelter and survival rations, then joined work crews while their household plots were marked in Mira's ledger. Those plots could not yet be sold, but families could pass their use to children or partners. The final law would come later. The record prevented a foreman from taking a finished house simply because its builder had become inconvenient. By the start of summer, the population had reached 190. The valley sent vegetables, seed, and goat cheese west along the repaired road. The port sent tools and salt east. Fields spread over the western plain, but Akira refused to plant every cleared acre. Grain needed seed, drainage, storage, and people available at harvest. Experienced farmers chose the land. Akira chose where the wall would stand and then left them alone. Darien did not remain idle during those months. News from the mainland arrived with each merchant. Overseer Pell's first report had been dismissed as an attempt to excuse losing 40 prisoners and a harvest he had never owned. Darien changed his mind when a bribed sailor returned with a piece of clean island iron and a sketch of the harbor. His main galleys were still serving the Crown's southern campaign, and the autumn storm season made a small invasion unreliable. Instead, he ordered nearby ports to deny Freehaven berths and sent men disguised as merchants to learn how Akira purified the land. Bran caught the first pair measuring the harbor wall at night. They carried a letter instructing them to identify the source of purification, confirm the monthly iron output, and avoid damaging the mine before House Balene's fleet returned. Akira expelled them on Malin's outbound ship, with copies of the letter posted in 3 ports. The message explained Darien's delay. He did not want a ruined island. He wanted Akira to finish revealing its value before taking it intact. That calculation created its own enemy. Port Rel, Greyhaven, and St. Orus belonged to the Western Maritime Compact, an agreement created by trading cities tired of private lords turning shipping lanes into personal toll roads. None wished to fight House Valen over one island. They also disliked Darien ordering them to refuse profitable cargo. Malin continued sailing. 2 Greyhaven captains followed. St. Orus sent a clerk to inspect Freehaven's weights and certify that its iron bars matched the measures written in Mira's contracts. At 6 months, the population passed 400. Elric's single forge became a row of 6 workshops around a common charcoal yard. Toma completed the first section of the landward wall using stone at the base and timber above. Nessa trained pilots from former smugglers, fishers, and 2 sailors who admitted only after being hired that they had once tried to rob her boat. The first large bloomery cracked during a night firing and buried a month's charcoal under clay. A merchant rejected 20 toolheads because the iron contained too much slag. Mira made Elric mark the bad batch and sell it as scrap rather than hide the loss. The decision cost money and earned repeat business. During late summer, The Western Plain produced its first full crop. Nearly 300 hectares had been cleared, though only half were planted in grain. The rest held beans, roots, fodder, and fallow strips. Imported seed and 2 new plows mattered as much as the clean soil. Fishing boats supplied protein, while the public granary retained enough grain for 4 months before any surplus could be exported. By the 9th month, 780 people lived on the island. Former prisoners returned with families. Tenant farmers arrived with seed and livestock. Quarry workers came under 1-year contracts that guaranteed wages, food, and passage home. Merchants opened small storehouses near the quay, but they leased ground through the public ledger, rather than buying permanent control of the waterfront. A council elected by work districts settled ordinary disputes. Bran commanded patrols. Mira managed stores, contracts, and civil records. Akira retained final authority over defense and the territory, yet no longer checked every sack or approved every roof beam. His own body changed with the island. He grew lean and strong, with calloused hands and a white scar across his left shoulder. He wore a dark green cloak over simple leather armor and an ordinary shoulder guard shaped from the wyvern's plate. His green-gold hair stayed tied back while he worked. The Velen galleys returned from the southern campaign shortly before winter. Darien still did not attack. Freehaven now traded under neutral seals, and a sudden landing would reopen questions about the famine grain, the secret exile, and the royal grant he claimed to defend. He spent the winter gathering hired ships, buying captains, and pressing agents into the 3 compact ports. Akira learned this from intercepted letters and from merchants who preferred a public enemy to a private toll collector. Before the next spring, Freehaven's population passed 1,000. The city still looked newly assembled. Stone foundations supported timber houses along 2 rising streets. Warehouses stood behind repaired docks, and the unfinished northern wall exposed fresh-cut beams. Mud swallowed cartwheels after rain. Hammers nevertheless rang from the shipyard. Carts carried grain from the Western Plain, and smoke rose from forges supplied by the island's iron. Freehaven exported iron tools, bloom iron, dried fish, cut stone, resin, and a cautious grain surplus after its own reserves were secured. It imported salt, cloth, medicine, fine steel, glass, seed varieties, and animals the island did not possess. The public mine, harbor fees, and pilot service paid for the wall, watch, roads, and grain reserve. Private workshops and farms paid workers and traded their surplus. The arrangement had flaws, but every obligation could be read in Mira's ledger before anyone agreed to it. One spring morning, the harbor watch rang the signal bell. A long vessel entered under white sails marked with the blue hawk of House Velen. The Velen ship carried no trade goods. Its captain brought 20 soldiers in polished breastplates and an envoy named Lord Severin, a cousin who had spent his youth praising whichever family heir occupied the largest chair. He stepped onto the dock in embroidered boots and looked at the cranes, warehouses, and crowded market. Then he checked the crest on his own papers, as if he had arrived at the wrong island. Freehaven did not resemble a noble capital. Many roads were packed earth. Half the houses still showed fresh timber. The outer wall lacked stone along its northern section. Yet hammers rang from the shipyard. Carts carried grain from the Western Plain, and 3 foreign merchant vessels waited at the quays. Severin read Darien's proclamation in the market square. Hunger Island belonged to House Velen by royal grant. All people living there were prisoners, descendants of prisoners, or illegal settlers. Its iron, stone, fish, and crops were family property. Half the previous year's harvest and all mined ore were to be delivered immediately. Akira was ordered to return to the mainland and answer charges of rebellion. The crowd listened in silence. Many had once been forced to kneel for officials with smaller titles. Darien had legal paper because he was head of House Velen. Their father had died before the famine, and the royal grant gave the house authority over prisoners sent to the island. What the proclamation avoided was just as important. A public rebellion case would require Darien to explain why his 19-year-old brother had been exiled without a hearing. and why the original relief grain inventories did not agree. Akira asked whether Severin had brought the famine ledgers as part of the evidence against him. The envoy's eyes moved toward the soldiers before returning to the page. He said those records were unrelated. That small pause told Mira more than his proclamation did. Akira invited the envoy to walk through the city. He showed him the public granary built where the wyvern had burned, the old storehouse. He showed him the hospital Mira operated with 2 apprentices. They passed the wall, the fields, the quarry road, and the harbor chain under construction. At every stop, Severin tried to identify something House Valen had supplied. The family had supplied prisoners. That answer did not improve his mood. Back at the dock, Akira gave him 1 copper coin. Severin held it between 2 fingers. "What is this?" "Payment for the square meter your family intended to use as my grave. Everything beyond it was built by us." The envoy's face tightened. Darian's soldiers shifted behind him, but Bran's watch lined the warehouses, and captains from Port Rel and Greyhaven had come ashore to observe. An attack in front of neutral merchants would turn a private claim into public evidence. Severin boarded without the harvest. The first fishing boat vanished 11 days later. Nessa found pieces of its sail caught on a southern reef. No bodies surfaced. The following week, raiders struck an ore barge after sunset. They killed 2 crewmen, took the cargo, and burned the vessel before patrol boats arrived. The attack stayed beyond the harbor wall. Darian wanted trade to fail without risking an official naval assault. Merchants began demanding escorts. Insurance fees rose in neighboring ports. 2 scheduled ships did not come. The effects reached the market before hunger did. Iron bars accumulated beneath tarps because no captain wanted them without an armed convoy. Elric reduced 2 forge crews when imported files, refractory clay, and fine steel failed to arrive. The price of salt doubled. The hospital had enough fever powder for 1 serious outbreak and no dependable replacement. Mira opened the reserve treasury to hire escorts and buy grain from the 1 captain still willing to sail. The northern wall lost 3 weeks of stonework because its budget became convoy money. No family missed a survival ration, but the city could see what isolation cost each day. Then someone entered Freehaven itself. A warehouse caught fire shortly after midnight. While crews fought the flames, a second intruder climbed the wall near the spring aqueduct and poured a clay jar into the settling basin. A watchwoman saw him and raised the alarm. Bran's patrol closed the channel before the liquid reached the city cisterns. The substance killed fish within seconds. Mira spent the next day supervising the cleaning of every pipe and using language severe enough to make laborers work faster, without knowing which insult applied to them. Joran found that the saboteur had entered with a copied dock token issued to a cooper's apprentice. The apprentice had lost it in a dice game 3 weeks earlier and hidden the mistake. Bran arrested the man who won it, but he had already passed the token to a stranger paid in Valenan silver. The stranger escaped over the unfinished northern wall. Akira ordered reserve wells opened, doubled coastal patrols, and replaced the simple tokens with numbered clay seals matched to Mira's ledger. He did not respond by imprisoning every newcomer. Darian would have welcomed that. A frightened city could destroy its own trust more efficiently than pirates could. The next raid failed. Nessa's pilots extinguished the harbor lights and moved 2 navigation buoys before sunset. After dark, they lit a false pair of leading beacons above a shallow southern channel. 2 pirate vessels followed the alignment, struck sandbars, and lost speed. Freehaven's patrol boats approached from behind the reef. Bran's archers disabled the steering crew. 1 pirate ship escaped. The other surrendered after Elric's newly built bolt thrower punched through its mast. Its cargo explained why the vessel had risked the harbor. 4 iron-bound barrels lay below deck. 1 had ruptured when the ship grounded, filling the hold with the smell of old blood. 3 remained sealed. Inside were preserved organs and blood from lesser sea monsters, concentrated strongly enough to make every fish near the drainage trench flee. The pirates had also carried lead-weighted nets, current markers, and a partial chart of Freehaven's western approach. Among the prisoners was a navigator named Kale. He had spent 15 years guiding smugglers through the western seas, and valued breathing more than Darian's confidence. Kale admitted that the captured ship had been testing currents and delivering the first bait barrels. Darian's main plan required 3 low vessels to sail near the true harbor entrance on an ebb tide, release a continuous blood trail, and escape along a northern shelf. Kale had drawn the route. His capture forced Darian to give the chart to a replacement who had never sailed the channel. Darian was assembling 12 warships and hired vessels at his home port. Their holds carried more barrels of the same bait. He intended to draw a Leviathan from the northern deeps, let it tear open Freehaven, and land troops after the defenders had spent their strength on the monster. The city knew the creature. Sailors had reported a shadow longer than a merchant ship beyond the fog. 2 years earlier, a northern fleet had vanished in the same waters. Old scars on the island's western cliffs suggested that something enormous had struck them before the corruption thickened. With the main island surveyed and no other complete cores found, the Leviathan was the only known dominant monster remaining in the region. Kale was brought under guard to the lighthouse, where Akira showed him the metal buoy. The navigator stopped talking. He traced the 3 crowns above the waves and asked where it had been found. The emblem belonged to the great maritime empire beyond the northern storm belt. It ruled island chains, moving fleets, and ports so large that Freehaven would fit inside one shipyard district. Imperial markers sometimes drifted south, but their vessels rarely crossed the storms. The Leviathan had come from those waters several years ago. Kale had seen it, following a black Imperial transport through the storm line. The ship escaped north. The monster remained. The old map, the buoy, and the beast now belonged to the same distant power. Akira filed that knowledge where future problems waited. Darian's fleet would arrive first. Kale gave a written deposition before Mira, 2 foreign captains, and Bran. He marked the bait route, named the brokers who paid him, and identified Darian's quartermaster. Akira promised only that truthful assistance would be placed before whatever court followed. Kale was kept in a guarded room near Nessa's chart office, where he could answer questions without approaching a boat. 3 days later, Malin Voss returned from Port Rel with an unmarked packet hidden beneath her cargo papers. Severin had sent it after learning what Darian intended to do with the Leviathan. Courage had not transformed him. Self-preservation had. His sworn statement confirmed that Darian ordered Akira removed without public hearing and named the Western Counting House where the original famine inventories and prisoner transport register were stored. Severin did not possess the ledgers. He asked the compact cities to secure them if Darian lost, and he requested immunity from charges connected to the proclamation. Mira read the request twice. He has discovered principles at the exact distance where they become safe. The statement did not clear Akira by itself. It told neutral magistrates where to look, and gave them a witness who understood the family seal. More importantly, the current pirate ship, the bait, and Kale's deposition established a crime that involved every port using the Western Sea. The Western Maritime Compact treated deliberate release of a true sea monster into a shared shipping lane as piracy, regardless of the sponsor's title. It did not decide who owned Hunger Island. It allowed member ports to seize pirate vessels and preserve evidence. They could also detain the person who commissioned such an attack for an admiralty hearing. Akira sent copies of Kale's deposition, Severin's statement, the pirate payment book, and samples from the sealed bait barrels to Port Rel, Greyhaven, and St. Oris. Nessa's fastest cutters left on separate routes. If one vanished, 2 might arrive. The city council met in the granary while the messengers were at sea. Several recent settlers proposed evacuation. Ships could carry perhaps half the population if cargo was abandoned. The rest could scatter among mainland ports. Bran reminded them that Darian controlled the nearest coast. Mira placed a list of names on the table, including people still wanted for debt, desertion, or political crimes. Dispersal meant returning to hiding. Akira listened before speaking. He had once wanted land because he was tired of being moved whenever another person desired more rent or profit. Freehaven's people had crossed the sea for the same reason, though their chains had different names. "If we leave now," he said, "Darien will learn that any home can be taken by making it expensive enough to defend. I do not intend to teach him that lesson." The vote to remain was not unanimous. It was strong enough. They had 20 days, according to Kale's estimate. Freehaven turned its harbor into a weapon. Elric forged 2 heavy harpoon heads and hundreds of chain links. Quarry workers cut anchor channels into the cliffs at the harbor mouth. Toma's crews built 2 coastal ballistas on protected stone platforms. Nessa mapped a narrow approach between submerged reefs and prepared 3 bait barges using the intact barrels from the captured ship, strengthened with sealed jars of fish oil. Kale explained the route Darien expected to use. The bait vessels needed the true western markers and the outgoing current to escape safely. Nessa shifted the outer buoys, built false leading beacons on the southern reef, and marked the hour when the tide would reverse. At that turn, incoming water crossed the southern shelf, curled around the outer reef, and returned seaward through the place Darien used for his rear line. An early release would carry the scent back across his own ships. A chain was stretched across the inner channel, supported by floating timber sections and wound through capstans on both shores. It could rise beneath a ship or monster entering the harbor. Smaller side cables led to hidden anchors. Fire crews stored sand, wet hides, and water carts throughout the lower city. Mira marked evacuation routes and divided grain among reserve cellars so one fire could not destroy the winter supply. The final weapon stood on the restored lighthouse platform. It was a ballista, larger than the one used against the Wyvern, built around iron fittings and a frame of old hardwood recovered from the western forest. Its harpoon carried a barbed iron shell around a point carved from the Wyvern's densest chest bone. A chain ran from the shaft to a cliff anchor. The lighthouse could strike the center of the narrow channel. It could also be reached only by climbing a stair exposed to wind and enemy fire. Preparation consumed more than iron. The mine stopped export work for 12 days. Private shipbuilding halted. Every defense crew still had to eat, and the treasury paid families whose wage earners left the fields for the walls. 34 residents chose to leave on the last outbound merchants. Akira did not stop them. 200 others who were not trained to fight joined fire, medical, transport, and shelter teams. On the 12th day, a cutter returned from Port Rel. 2 compact magistrates and observers from all 3 cities followed aboard Malin's brig, which entered from the eastern coast after dark. Their ship remained hidden in a cove beyond the central ridge. Darien would see no neutral flags when he arrived. The observers could not win Freehaven's battle. They could ensure that the evidence survived it. Akira practiced the lighthouse firing sequence until he could perform it with injured hands. Bran trained separate crews for each shore battery. Mira assigned deputies to the hospital, granaries, fire lines, and civilian shelters. Nessa placed command of every boat with a named replacement. No one waited for Akira to inspect every knot. Before dawn on the 20th day, a low storm haze covered the western sea. The water beneath it became unnaturally flat. Fish rose along the harbor wall, gasping at the surface. Gulls fled inland. Beyond the western headland, 12 sails appeared as gray shapes in 2 dark lines. Under the water, a shadow moved toward Freehaven. Beneath the low storm haze, Darien anchored beyond ballista range and sent 1 boat under white flag. He stood in its bow wearing blue steel armor trimmed with silver. The older brother had changed little since the beach. His dark hair was neat, despite the wind, and his posture carried the confidence of a man who had never been punished for a decision. Behind him waited 2 officers and a herald with a speaking horn. Freehaven's defenders lined the western wall. Bran commanded from the north tower. Mira remained below in the harbor district, where colored flags connected her runners to the hospital, shelters, granaries, and fire crews. Akira stood above the main gate in his green cloak and wyvern shoulder plate. Darien's herald offered terms. Freehaven would surrender Akira, open the harbor, and transfer its mines and ships. In return, ordinary residents would be spared and permitted to remain as lawful workers of House Valen. A murmur passed through the newest settlers. Some had children in the shelters. Some had arrived too recently to remember the valley when clean water fit inside a shell cup. The first refusal came from Jorin. He raised both scarred hands from the rope line and shouted that House Valen had already spared them once by sending them to die. Others answered. Farmers struck spear butts against the wall. Quarry workers lifted hammers. The sound spread from the western gate to the docks. Bran leaned over the parapet. We heard the same promise when they put us on prison ships. You will meet a different lie. Darian looked at Akira rather than Bran. You have filled their heads with a miracle you cannot protect. When the harbor burns, they will understand what you cost them. Akira considered the 12 ships behind him. 4 were true war galleys with reinforced bows. 5 were armed merchant hulls carrying mercenaries. 3 lighter vessels rode low, their decks crowded with sealed barrels. You came a long way to explain that, Akira said. You should return before the tide turns. Darian's boat withdrew. His forward line weighed anchor. Oars spread from the 2 largest galleys, and the fleet advanced through the gray half-light until its catapults and Freehaven's shore weapons could reach one another. The movement closed the gap that had protected the parley. The first stone struck 10 minutes later. 2 galleys launched clay firepots over the outer wall. Most broke on empty ground that Mira had ordered cleared days earlier. One struck a roof near the fish market. Fire crews reached it before the flames spread. Freehaven's shore ballistas answered. The southern weapon sent an iron bolt through a galley's forward shield. The ship turned, exposing its side to avoid a second shot. Nessa's signal flags rose from a hidden station on the cliff. 2 false leading beacons flared on the southern reef. Beneath them, the navigation buoys shifted during the night, formed the same alignment Kale had drawn for Darian's approach. In the storm haze, the true and false channels looked like different shades of black water. Darian's right wing advanced toward the apparent safe line. The lead hired vessel crossed the first marker and struck submerged rock. Its hull lifted, rolled, and stopped. The ship behind it swerved. Freehaven's small boats emerged from behind the reef and fired burning arrows into the tangled rigging. The mercenaries cut lines and returned fire. One patrol boat took a bolt through its bow. Its crew abandoned it into the shallows, where defenders pulled them behind stone screens. At the true harbor mouth, the 2 heaviest galleys approached in line. Their reinforced bows were meant to break the floating chain before it could rise. Bran waited until the first crossed the outer markers. He dropped his red flag. Capstans turned on both cliffs. The harbor chain lifted from the water at an angle, not directly ahead of the galley. It caught beneath the port side and dragged the bow sideways. The ship behind attempted to pass, but the narrow approach gave it no room. Its oars struck the first galley's hull and shattered in a row. The northern ballista fired. Its bolt tore through the second ship's steering deck. For half an hour, Darian's fleet fought the harbor rather than the city. False markers led archers toward empty stone. Reefs forced large ships into predictable lanes. Small boats appeared, shot, and vanished behind headlands. Freehaven lost a watch platform and 2 patrol craft. Darian lost 1 hired ship to the reef, 1 mast, and control of the main channel. Then he ordered the bait vessels forward. Kale's original route required them to pass close to the true harbor mouth during the ebb tide and release the blood in a long trail. They would then escape north before the Leviathan reached shallow water. That route was now blocked by the 2 tangled galleys. The replacement navigator followed the copied buoy alignment toward the south and discovered too late that the lead channel ended on a shelf. Freehaven's patrol boats came out behind him. A ballista bolt crossed over the first bait ship and broke the steering frame of the second. The 3 low vessels bunched together between the reef and Darian's rear line. The tidal reversal had begun. Water crossed the southern shelf and curled seaward through Darian's rear line. Signal flags snapped above the flagship. Darian ordered the crews to release the bait before Freehaven captured it. Barrels rolled to the rails. Their lids broke. Dark blood and weighted nets of monster organs entered water that no longer flowed toward the city. The scent spread backward across Darian's own formation. The shadow beneath the bay turned. It passed under the rear line where the blood was thickest. Water lifted above it in a moving ridge. Men on the nearest bait ship looked over the side. A spine surfaced, black and ridged like a chain of reefs. The Leviathan struck from below. The hull broke around its body. The central mast tipped, dragging rigging and sailors into the water. A second vessel tried to turn. The Leviathan's tail emerged behind it, taller than the harbor wall, and swept across the stern. Timber burst outward. Darian's plan failed because Freehaven had taken his navigator, moved the markers, blocked the intended route, and forced the release after the tide changed. His pride supplied the final order, but the defenders had created the mistake. His formation collapsed. The flagship tried to pull west of the chaos. Nessa signaled the southern battery. Its next bolt smashed the rudder housing, and a patrol boat cut across the stern to foul the steering oar with a weighted line. The heavy vessel drifted onto a shoal that Nessa had mapped months earlier, inside Freehaven's original coastal waters. Darian's crew could still fire and signal. They could no longer leave without freeing the hull under attack. Some captains continued toward the harbor. Others fled from the creature. Mercenaries cut anchor ropes and ignored signals from the flagship. Men jumped from the broken ship and became smaller disturbances in water already churning around something vast. Akira had no reason to trust the Leviathan to leave after finishing Darian's nearest ships. It was already inside the approaches, surrounded by blood and wounded hulls, and the tide window for Freehaven's prepared trap was closing. If it escaped into deep water, every nearby port would remain hostage to the same creature. The chains, crews, and monster would never align this well again. Akira descended from the wall and ran toward the western dock. Nessa waited with 3 bait barges, each carrying barrels taken from the captured pirate vessel and sealed jars of fish oil. Their crews had volunteered, knowing the plan required them to pass near the Leviathan. Akira boarded the lead barge. "Take us outside the chain." Nessa did not argue. Her pilots rowed through the inner channel, while Bran's batteries kept Darian's nearest galley occupied. The Leviathan surfaced beside the wrecked vessel. Its head resembled that of a deep-sea reptile, armored in overlapping plates. Water streamed from a jaw large enough to close around a house. Pale lines glowed beneath its throat and continued along the ribs. The pale lines marked what the system recognized. Somewhere behind those plates lay the only complete core the island surveys and Kale's records had found in the region. The monster bit the wreck in half. Nessa's crew opened the first bait barrel and let a controlled stream pour from the stern. The barge turned toward the prepared channel between 2 cliff points. The other 2 barges spread behind it, strengthening the trail. Its head swung toward them. "Faster," Nessa ordered. The crews rowed. The lead barge passed a disabled Valen ship, whose soldiers were trying to launch boats. Darian's archers recognized Akira and released a volley. Arrows struck the deck and barrel hoops. One pilot fell with a shaft through his arm. Akira dragged him behind the gunwale and took his oar. The Leviathan came through the wreckage. Its wake rolled the second bait barge, far enough to spill 2 men into the sea. A patrol boat pulled one aboard. The other vanished between waves. The lead barge entered the narrow channel. Cliffs rose on both sides. The water deepened through the center and broke over shelves near the edges. Akira emptied the last barrel, then cut the tow line, connecting the barge to its bait net. Nessa steered toward a side opening, barely wide enough for the craft. The Leviathan followed the sinking net straight into the channel. Bran's blue flag rose on the northern cliff. The main chain came up beneath the creature's chest. It did not stop the Leviathan. The chain bent into a deep curve and tore water from the channel, but the anchored ends held. The monster's forward motion slowed. Its head rose. Side batteries fired together. 2 harpoons crossed the channel. The southern shaft struck behind the left forefin and buried its barbs between plates. The northern shot entered lower along the ribs. Crews released the attached chains through controlled brakes, allowing the Leviathan to advance another 20 yards before the lines snapped tight. The monster roared. The sound struck Akira inside the ribs. Windows shattered along the lower harbor. the Leviathan twisted, pulling against 3 directions. One cliff anchor shifted in its bed. Stone cracked around the iron ring. Freehaven's ships moved from protected coves. They caught the side chains with towing hooks and rowed away from the channel, adding their weight to the anchors. On shore, hundreds of hands turned capstans. Akira reached the main dock and climbed to the command platform. The plan required the Leviathan's chest to rise beneath the lighthouse. At present, it lay too low in the channel, protected by water and its own forelimbs. Bran signaled the North crews to shorten their chain. The Leviathan rolled toward that side. The southern harpoon pulled across its body, scraping plates loose. Archers fired heavy shafts into the exposed gaps, more to irritate the monster than injure it. The Leviathan answered with its tail. The strike hit the northern cliff below the ballista. The stone platform split. Men and timber fell into the channel. Bran jumped toward the inner ledge, caught a support rope, and slammed against the wall. The northern harpoon chain went slack. Freed on one side, the Leviathan twisted toward the city. The main chain took its full weight. One floating support snapped. Then another. The chain rose from the water, link by link, vibrating hard enough to spray metal dust from the capstans. "Clear the lower mechanism," Akira shouted. Workers ran. The eastern anchor block tore out of the quay. The central chain broke. Its loose end whipped across the harbor and cut through a warehouse crane. The Leviathan surged forward. Its head passed the outer wall and entered the lower basin. The remaining side harpoon dragged one shoulder back, forcing the monster against the breakwater, but the stone barrier crumbled under its weight. A Velen firepot struck the fish market at the same moment. Flames spread along roofs already damaged by the creature's wave. Civilians poured through Mira's marked lanes toward the upper city. Fire crews moved against them, pulling carts downhill. Akira saw Bran, carried from the northern cliff, with blood covering one side of his armor. The remaining ballista stood on the south point, but its angle could reach only the Leviathan's back. The lighthouse weapon waited above the creature's path. Akira handed command of the harbor boats to Nissa and ran. He crossed the market behind the last civilian group. Burning oil flowed through a gutter. Mira stood at the intersection, directing teams by flag, because the roar made speech useless. She caught Akira's arm, long enough to point toward the mountain aqueduct controls. He understood. The old river channel entered the harbor above the western quarter. Normally, gates divided the flow among mills and cisterns, and together they could release a hard current through the lower basin. Akira continued toward the lighthouse stairs. Enemy archers had found the route. Arrows struck the stone around him. One cut his cloak. He climbed with the inner wall between himself and the ships, whenever the stair curved, then crossed exposed landings at a run. Below, Mira's runners reached the water gates. The Leviathan pushed farther into the basin. Its head struck the warehouse row. Roofs folded beneath its jaw. The southern harpoon line held around one forelimb, keeping the body angled across the harbor instead of straight toward the residential streets. Velen soldiers attempted to land behind the creature. Bran's deputies met them at the inner quay. The defense continued without Akira's orders. Watch units closed lanes. Archers shifted to the roofs. Reserve crews took the southern capstan after the first team suffered casualties. Akira reached the lighthouse platform. Wind drove rain across the open height. The giant ballista remained loaded, its bone-tipped harpoon aimed down the channel. Toma and Elric waited with 4 crew members. An earlier stone had damaged the left mounting rail. The weapon could turn only a few degrees. "The chest is too low," Elric said. Akira looked over the edge. The Leviathan's armored back filled the harbor beneath them. The pale core lines showed only near its throat. Its head remained level with the docks. A signal bell rang 3 times from the aqueduct. The water gates opened. A surge from the mountain river rushed through the western channel. Mira's fire crews pushed burning wreckage into the flow. Beams, broken carts, and oil-soaked debris swept toward the Leviathan's face. The creature recoiled from flame and impact. It lifted its head above the basin wall. Plates along the chest separated. Pale light shone beneath them. Toma's crew turned the ballista, as far as the damaged rail allowed. The aim fell left of the core. Akira seized a pry bar and drove it beneath the mount. Elric joined him. They forced the rear frame sideways while the wind pressed against the loaded arms. Wood groaned. The mounting pin bent. Below, the Leviathan snapped at the burning debris. Its chest rose higher. Mira's flag on the market roof changed from blue to white. The southern capstan crew released 3 yards of chain. The monster shifted right. The core moved into line. A crack opened across the ballista base. Akira placed both hands on the firing lever. 20 months ago, I owned 1 square meter, he said. It seems crowded now. The Leviathan turned its head toward the lighthouse. Akira pulled. The throwing arms slammed forward. The bone-tipped harpoon crossed the rein and struck the open chest below the throat. Its iron shell split the first plate. The wyvern bone drove through the tissue beneath and stopped. The core remained whole. The Leviathan hit the lighthouse base. The tower lurched. Stone cracked through the platform. 1 crewman fell against the rail. The ballista slid forward until its broken mount caught. The harpoon chain ran from the shaft through a breaking capstan to the cliff anchor behind the tower. As the Leviathan recoiled, the barbs caught behind the split chest plate. Its body moved away while the tether held the shaft nearly fixed, forcing the bone point deeper. The point stopped against the edge of the core instead of piercing it. The damaged break began to slip. Link by link, the chain paid out. Once the shaft followed the creature's movement, the Leviathan could tear it free. Akira and the crew seized the capstan bars and turned only far enough to recover the slack. The mechanism kicked backward under the monster's weight. Toma lost his grip and broke 2 fingers against the frame. The anchor stone shifted. Below, Mira saw the lighthouse line tighten and changed her signal. The southern capstan hauled. Its side harpoon dragged the Leviathan's forelimb outward, rotating the chest across the fixed bone point. The creature gathered itself for another lunge. Akira waited until the chain snapped straight, forced the capstan through the final quarter turn, and slammed the locking pawl into place. The Leviathan's own momentum drove its core across the point. Light surged along the chain. Every metal link rang. The core shattered. The Leviathan's head struck the water. Its body rolled against a ruined breakwater and lay still, except for waves moving over the plates. Rain hissed on the fires. The harbor defense slowed as both fleets understood what had happened. The system appeared over the wrecked city. True monster destroyed. Current area 100 square kilometers. New area 10,000 square kilometers. Choose a direction. Akira stood on the damaged lighthouse and faced north, where corruption fog covered the sea beyond the visible reefs. The system did not allow a detached claim or a thin road to distant islands. It allowed one broad sector, joined to the territory he already held. He chose the northern maritime sector, wide enough for a continuous front to include the neighboring eastern and western waters as it advanced. The pale boundaries spread from the northern half of the owned coast in a vast fan. Fog withdrew before that single connected front. It rolled away from reefs, channels, and islands hidden for generations. Black water cleared to deep blue. Lines of white surf appeared where no charts had shown land. Forested islands emerged ahead of the main island. Long sandbars shone along the eastern edge of the sector. Natural harbors opened between cliffs farther west. The territory filled connected water and land behind the advancing boundary until 10,000 square kilometers lay within it. The pale front passed over a harbor whose battle had already been decided. Freehaven still burned. Darien's fleet remained broken and trapped, and Bran remained wounded. The new geography revealed the scale of the victory, rather than causing it. 3 enemy ships had been destroyed by the Leviathan. 2 remained trapped on the southern reefs. 1 burned near the outer line. The rest were damaged, scattered, and exposed in clear water. Darien's hired captains lowered their flags first. His flagship did not escape. Its rudder housing had been broken before the Leviathan entered the channel, and the hull still rested on the old western shoal. Freehaven's patrol boats had surrounded it, while Akira climbed the lighthouse. The surviving shore ballista fired through its mainsail when the crew tried to warp the ship free. Bran's deputies boarded from both sides, along routes Nessa had charted long before the new territory appeared. Akira reached the flagship after the fighting ended. Darien waited on the quarterdeck with 6 household guards. His blue armor was wet, his neat hair plastered across his forehead. He ordered the men forward. They looked at the dead Leviathan filling half the harbor, the surrendered ships, and Akira approaching with Freehaven's watch behind him. One guard set down his sword. The others followed. Darien's confidence finally broke into anger. He accused Akira of stealing the island, the mines, and the family name. He insisted that a former prisoner could never become a lawful ruler, regardless of how many desperate people followed him. Akira stopped within arm's reach. "You were right about one thing," he said. "1 meter would have been enough for my grave. I used it differently." Akira ordered Bran's guards to take his brother alive. The flagship's cabin contained evidence of the present war, not a conveniently preserved history of every crime Darien had committed. Bran's officers found signed commissions for the pirate captains, payment records for the bait and hired ships, and Kale's route copied in a Valen clerk's hand. They also found orders to seize the mine and lists dividing Freehaven's workshops among Darien's supporters. The captain's log recorded the command to release the bait after the tide changed. Those documents were enough for the battle in front of them. The original famine case would require the ledgers Severin had identified on the mainland and testimony from the people who handled them. After the harbor was secured, Malin's brig emerged from the eastern cove, with the compact magistrates and neutral observers aboard. They came ashore to a city that had already captured Darien. Kale repeated his deposition in their presence. The surviving pirate quartermaster identified the payment book. Copies of the current orders were made, numbered, and sealed by Freehaven and all 3 compact cities. Under the Western Maritime Compact, Darien could be detained for sponsoring piracy and deliberately releasing a true monster into shared waters. The magistrates did not decide the island's ownership on the quay. They issued a joint warrant, recognized Freehaven's right to hold its attacker, and promised that he would face an admiralty hearing rather than be quietly returned to his own household. Darien was taken to the stone customs house under Bran's guard. Freehaven had defeated the fleet, trapped the flagship, killed the Leviathan, and captured its commander before the new geography could rescue any of them. The final multiplication changed the scale of the victory, not its cause. Freehaven learned the price of victory before it began celebrating it. Mira spent the first night after the battle, moving between the hospital, the shelters, and a table in the granary, where every returning crew reported its names. By sunrise, 27 Freehaven residents were confirmed dead. 8 had fallen at the northern platform and inner quay. 7 were sailors, including the man lost from the bait barge. 5 died in the fire and rescue crews. 4 civilians had been trapped when the warehouse row collapsed. The remaining 3 had held the southern capstan after its first team went down. 73 people carried wounds serious enough to keep them from work. Enemy dead were counted separately and returned to surviving captains when possible. Freehaven had fought for its home. It did not need to pretend that men on the other ships had possessed no families. The city buried its own on the eastern hill above the First Valley Road. Akira read the names because Bran could not stand, and Mira's voice had failed after a night without sleep. Families placed tools, pieces of rope, flowers, or written scraps beside the graves. Joran left the scorched handle of a capstan bar for the people who had held it with him. Akira had gained 10,000 square kilometers. The fresh graves occupied less than 100. He remained until the last stone was set. Repair began that afternoon because rain, fire, and hunger did not respect mourning. 19 houses were unsafe. 3 lower warehouses had collapsed or burned. The western breakwater had a gap broad enough for winter waves to enter the basin. 2 patrol boats were gone. The northern ballista lay at the bottom of the channel, and the lighthouse platform could not support another shot. Mira's decision to divide the grain had saved the city from disaster. Even so, flooded cellars and fire destroyed almost a fifth of the stored grain, much of the salt, and several crates of medicine. Freehaven could reach the next harvest on reduced reserves, but not while feeding wounded people, prisoners, repair crews, and families whose homes had burned. The compact observers sent messages before the smoke cleared. Port Rel answered first. Malin returned with grain, timber, medicine, sailcloth, and 2 surgeons. Greyhaven supplied rope and seasoned planks for the breakwater. St. Orus extended credit through its merchants, after Mira placed Freehaven's harbor fees and a measured share of processed Leviathan oil against the debt. The agreement was not charity. The ports received discounted pilot service through the newly opened channels for 1 year, and the right to purchase Leviathan materials at the same posted price as Freehaven merchants. No city received ownership of a mine, harbor, or island. The terms kept people fed and repairs moving without exchanging one master for another. Toma directed the lower warehouses from a chair, while his broken fingers healed, shouting whenever anyone placed a beam where he could not see it. Elric recovered chain from the harbor and complained that the Leviathan had twisted perfectly good iron into expensive rope. The impact at the northern cliff broke 2 ribs and opened his old border wound, but the armor he had patched for years kept the stone edge from cutting deeper. Mira confined him to the hospital until he could walk across the room without leaning on other patients. He escaped twice and was returned by his own guards. The dead Leviathan could not remain in the harbor. Hundreds of workers cut usable plate, bone, oil, and meat from the body, while Nessa's ships towed sections beyond the western reefs. The territory made the flesh safe, though Mira limited its use until she had tested every part. 2 workers developed rashes from untreated oil, and she ordered gloves after explaining that edible did not mean pleasant to bathe in. Abundance created work as quickly as scarcity did. Darien remained in the stone customs house under Freehaven guard. 9 days after the battle, the compact magistrates held an admiralty hearing in the repaired lower hall of the lighthouse. The hearing addressed neither the old famine theft nor final ownership of House Valen's island grant. Its question was narrower and easier to prove. Had Darien commissioned piracy and deliberately released a true monster into shared waters? Kale testified under guard. He identified his route, the brokers, the payment records, and the replacement navigator who had used his chart. The captured pirate quartermaster confirmed the signatures. Valen officers who had surrendered described the command to dump the bait after the tide changed. Darien called them cowards and insisted that a noble house could police waters granted to it by the crown. The magistrates answered that no royal grant allowed a lord to feed merchant crews to a Leviathan. They ordered Darien transferred to the Compact's Admiralty prison, pending a wider royal inquiry. Freehaven agreed only after the 3 cities signed that he could not be returned to House Valen custody or released without public notice. His current officers lost command of the surviving ships. Crews not charged with murder were permitted to sail home after surrendering weapons and giving statements. Kale received a reduced sentence for his cooperation. He remained in Freehaven under supervision, rather than entering a mainland prison. Nessa assigned him to chart the new northern waters, and informed him that one deliberately false sounding would move his next job from a pilot boat to the quarry. He believed her. The older crime required a different process. Severin's statement reached the Royal Customs Office because the missing relief grain had belonged to the Crown, not merely House Valen. A customs examiner traveled with a St. Orus magistrate to the Western Counting House, named in the packet. Darien's steward attempted to move 2 chests of records before they arrived. Dock workers stopped the cart after recognizing the official seals and the description circulated by Port Rel. Inside the chests were the original grain inventory, the false copy bearing Akira's seal, and payment entries from merchants who had purchased the diverted wagons. The prisoner transport register showed that Akira had been sent to Hunger Island before any hearing date was assigned. The documents had survived because Darien needed the private accounts to divide profits and threaten the people who helped him. He had hidden them from auditors rather than destroying the leverage they gave him. Pell and the former grain steward both testified once the records made denial useless. Each tried to blame the other. Their disagreement mattered less than the matching dates, weights, and payments. Severin received limited immunity for delivering his statement, and then testified in person. He gained no office or reward from changing sides. 3 weeks after the battle, the Royal Customs Office issued its finding. Akira had not stolen the famine grain. The inventory carrying his seal had been falsified. Darian's title and the future of House Villain would be decided by the crown after the Admiralty case, but the charge used to exile Akira was formally withdrawn. Akira read the finding once and passed it to Mira for the archive. Returning to the family estate never entered Akira's plans. The document gave him back a name he no longer needed for a home. Survey crews sailed through the cleared waters, while the legal mess moved across the mainland. They mapped 37 islands, large enough for future settlements, and dozens of smaller rocks. The charts also marked 3 deep natural harbors, rich fishing grounds, and 2 channels that shortened the route between northern and southern ports by several days. The new territory remained mostly wild. No towers rose from it overnight. No roads appeared. The islands were safe from corruption, and everything beyond that required hands, tools, ships, and time. Those facts made neighboring cities eager to negotiate, but Freehaven no longer had to accept the first offer placed on its table. Representatives of Port Rel, Greyhaven, and St. Oris met Akira in the repaired lighthouse hall. None declared him emperor or pretended old law had vanished. The royal grant would be argued for years by people who enjoyed arguments conducted indoors. The ports recognized Freehaven's practical control of the main island, the surrounding channels, and the newly opened harbors because its pilots knew the routes. Its people occupied the central port, and its defense had prevented Darian's monster from entering every nearby shipping lane. The agreement granted mutual trade, rescue obligations, and navigation through licensed channels. No signatory would return Akira or any resident to House Villain without an open court hearing. Freehaven set pilot fees publicly and could not change them after a ship entered its waters. Compact merchants paid the same rates as local ones. In return, the 3 cities recognized Freehaven's seals on cargo, contracts, and household records. It was practical recognition, written by people who understood that ownership became difficult to dispute when it possessed walls, harvests, witnesses, maps, and ships. Freehaven adopted its land charter 2 days later. It did not create property from nothing. Mira had recorded provisional household plots, workshops, and leases since the first wave of settlers arrived. The charter made those existing rights permanent and placed limits on Akira's authority over them. Families kept protected household plots as long as they used them, maintained them, rented them through the public ledger, or lawfully passed them to someone else. Workshops could be inherited or sold. Common fields, springs, roads, mines, and harbors could not become private toll gates. No debt could be transferred to a child. Any future public levy had to state its amount, purpose, and end date before collection began. The system recognized all 10,000 square kilometers as Akira's territory. The charter ensured that a family's roof did not depend on his mood. Mira placed the first completed document in front of him. It belonged to Sen and his sister, who had once tried to steal seed grain and now operated the rebuilt dock ramp. Sen stood across the table with sawdust on his sleeves, waiting for the hidden condition. Akira signed the page and handed it over. "How long is it ours?" Sen asked. "As long as you live there. Maintain it, rent it under the law, or pass it to someone else." Sen checked the back of the page. There was no second column of fees, and no clause allowing a noble to reclaim the house when its value increased. He folded the charter with both hands and left without speaking. Mira watched him cross the square. "You have finally become a landlord. Do not insult me during official work." By the first harvest after the war, Freehaven's population had reached nearly 1,400. Some growth came from the families of residents who had survived the battle. Some came from sailors who had watched a former prison island defend its own harbor and decided it offered better odds than their old employers. The city still had muddy streets after heavy rain. The eastern wall remained timber. The public bathhouse had one boiler that failed whenever too many people arrived before sunrise. Yet the repaired granaries were full, and the breakwater carried new stone. The quarry road moved loaded carts, and smoke rose from workshops whose owners expected to open again the next morning. Ships no longer entered the harbor without signaling. Captains stopped at the outer marker and requested a pilot before crossing Freehaven's waters. The harvest festival began on the eastern hill, with the names of the war dead read aloud. Only after the final name did the music move down into the city. Akira stood on the western wall as evening reached the harbor. His dark green cloak moved in the sea wind. Beneath the wyvern shoulder plate, his armor was ordinary leather, worn smooth by use. The green of his hair remained dark at the roots and faded to gold near the ends, bright in the last sunlight. His face had lost the starved sharpness of the boy abandoned on the beach. His blue eyes were calmer, though Mira claimed they still acquired a dangerous look whenever someone mentioned unnecessary fees. Below him, long tables filled the central square. Farmers brought the first bread from the western fields. Fishers roasted their catch beside iron braziers. Children who had never seen corrupted water raced around the old fountain and ignored repeated instructions to walk. At the center of the square stood the shell of the first armored crab. Someone had cleaned it, mounted it on a stone base, and placed a wooden crown between its eye stalks. Akira stopped in front of the monument. Who approved this? Mira held a cup of fruit wine and consulted a page in her ledger with exaggerated care. The council, the harbor guild, the farmers, the watch, and a large number of children who were not legally asked. It attacked me. That appears in the inscription. The inscription called the crab the first guardian of Freehaven and described its defeat as the founding victory of the archipelago. Akira suspected that Joran had written the part claiming the creature was 12 feet tall. He considered ordering the crown removed. A group of children gathered nearby, ready to defend it, through volume, if necessary. Akira left the crab in office. As sunset reached the harbor, the system appeared at the edge of his sight. Current territory, 10,000 square kilometers. Next expansion, 1 million square kilometers. The number no longer felt like a private reward. It covered empty islands awaiting farms, reefs awaiting markers, and waters that needed patrols. The first square meter had been enough for one injured man to stand. 10,000 square kilometers held people who had chosen to stand with him. Mira joined him on the wall and reminded him that the Eastern District's public latrine remained unfinished. Then we will delay conquering a continent until tomorrow, Akira said. A bell rang from the northern watchtower. The festival music faltered. A runner reached the wall and reported an unknown vessel approaching through the cleared northern passage. Akira looked beyond the lighthouse. A black ship entered the archipelago under sails larger than those of Darien's flagship. Its high sides carried rows of closed weapon ports. Metal bands reinforced the bow. Above, it flew a white banner marked with 3 crowns over dark waves. The same emblem had appeared on the buoy and the old map. The Imperial ship stopped outside the harbor chain and sent a signal through a brass horn. Unknown ruler of the Zero Archipelago, these waters belong to the great maritime empire. Lower your banner and prepare to receive an imperial governor. Some had hands near weapons. Others looked back at the festival tables, where the crowned crab continued guarding the bread. The corruption fog was gone from the owned waters. Far beyond the northern boundary, ordinary storm clouds stood in broken dark walls. Through the stable, clear passage between them, a distant coastline stretched across the horizon, too large to be another island. Mira asked what they should do. Akira studied the imperial banner, then the system's next number. First, we finish the festival, he said. Tomorrow, we explain that their maps are out of date. Behind him, Freehaven's lights came on one street at a time.